When a soul rises quietly, without noise or applause, the world rarely notices the beginning. People often mistake your silence for weakness, your patience for passivity, and your gentleness for lack of power. They watch you move through life with calm restraint, assuming you are somehow behind them, beneath them, or blind to the games they play. But what they never understood is that real strength rarely announces itself. It grows in stillness, it deepens in storms, it sharpens in shadows, and then one day, without warning, it reveals itself, not through force, but through transformation. You were never competing with them, yet somehow you surpassed them, not because you wanted to win, but because your path demanded growth, while theirs demanded noise. They relied on shortcuts, while you relied on character. They chased attention while you chased understanding. They mocked what they did not understand, and they doubted what they could not see unfolding within you. Yet life has a way of honoring what is hidden. It magnifies what is genuine and diminishes what is hollow. You outclassed them the moment you stopped trying to prove anything, when you chose to refine your spirit instead of defending your name. When you embraced solitude instead of begging for company, when you realized that not every battle is worth fighting, and not every insult deserves an answer. The power you carry was formed in the unseen places, where endurance was carved from disappointment, where clarity was born from confusion, and where wisdom was sculpted from pain. And while they were busy entertaining the world, you were becoming someone the world could not ignore. It was never about being better, it was about being true, and truth always rises. They walked ahead with pride, but you walked within with purpose. They mistook arrogance for confidence, but your confidence came from surviving storms they never knew existed. You learned to stand upright even when your heart was trembling, to speak softly even when you were underestimated, and to choose peace even when chaos invited you closer. Those choices refined you in ways comparison never could. The beauty of your rise is that it wasn't fueled by revenge. You didn't outclass them by trying to outshine them. You outclassed them by simply growing, healing, and understanding yourself. Every time you chose integrity over popularity, you stepped into a higher realm. Every time you forgave without receiving an apology, you elevated beyond their reach. Every time you walked away instead of reacting, you rose above the level where pettiness thrives. Growth is subtle, but its results are unmistakable. And those who once thought they were ahead now see a truth they can't ignore. You surpassed them in discipline, in character, in depth, and in spirit. Not because you wanted to prove them wrong, but because you wanted to become someone you could be proud of. Life honored that intention. Now they watch you with a mix of confusion and discomfort, wondering how someone they underestimated became someone they cannot measure. They don't understand that the strength you carry was not built in victory, but in endurance. They don't understand that the wisdom you speak was not learned in comfort, but in struggle. They don't understand that the grace you hold was born from battles they never saw. You outclassed them because you chose a different kind of greatness, one rooted not in applause but in authenticity, one grounded not in ego but in purpose, one defined not by comparison but by becoming. And even if they never admit it, they feel the shift. They sense the distance that now exists, a distance created not by pride, but by growth. What once felt like disadvantage has become your refinement. What once felt like loss has become your awakening, and what once felt like silence has become your quiet strength. You didn't rise by climbing over them. You rose by rising within yourself. And now your very presence is a reminder of what happens when a soul chooses depth over noise, truth over illusion, and purpose over approval. You outclassed them long before they noticed. The world is only now catching up. Strength that is born in silence often goes unnoticed until it becomes impossible to ignore. People rarely understand the kind of power that grows away from the crowd, in the quiet corners of your life where no one applauds, no one praises, and no one offers validation. It is in those unseen spaces where your spirit learned to endure, where your resilience was shaped by adversity, and where your determination learned to breathe through disappointment. You did not rise because the world encouraged you. You rose because something inside you refused to collapse. In silence, your courage took shape. In solitude, your character expanded. In stillness, your wisdom began to form its foundation. What they saw as weakness was actually the birthplace of your strength. Silence became your teacher, guiding you to listen to your own heartbeat instead of the noise of others. You discovered that real strength does not need to compete with sound. It does not demand recognition, nor does it seek validation. Real strength grows from the experiences that teach you patience, from the wounds that force you to learn, and from the moments where you had no choice but to trust that something within you was greater than the chaos around you. While they measured power by how loudly someone speaks, you learned that the strongest souls often speak the least. The quiet you carried was never emptiness, it was preparation. As you walked through seasons others never knew you endured, your silence was misinterpreted. People assumed you were weak because you chose not to explain yourself. They mistook your calmness for surrender, your restraint for fear, your gentleness for lack of ability. They had no idea that you were conserving energy, not losing it. They didn't realize that stillness is sometimes the clearest sign of confidence. You were not silenced, you were becoming selective with your voice. You were not hiding, you were growing in places where their eyes could not reach. Life often builds the strongest characters away from the spotlight. Your strength came from nights when you carried emotions too heavy to share. It came from mornings where you forced yourself forward even when you felt broken. It came from choosing to keep moving when everything around you tried to hold you back. In silence, you learned to breathe through pain without collapsing under it. You learned to observe instead of react. You learned that every storm eventually ends, and when it does, those who endured it emerge with a depth that cannot be taught through comfort. The growth you experienced in silence became a shield around your spirit. It allowed you to navigate situations others would have crumbled under. It gave you clarity when intimidation tried to force confusion. It gave you patience when fear tried to rush your decisions. While others relied on the validation of crowds, you relied on your inner compass. That inner compass grew sharper each time you chose reflection over reaction. It guided you through moments that demanded maturity beyond your years. It protected you from the impulse to prove yourself to people unworthy of the explanation. With every quiet moment, you were evolving. You just didn't realize it at the time. The battles fought in silence were strengthening your identity. The tears shed in private were washing away the illusions that once kept you small. The disappointments that you endured without an audience were sculpting a power that no one could steal from you. Each silent victory, each silent healing, each silent choice to rise, shaped the person you became. And even though no one celebrated those moments, they were the reason you eventually outclassed those who underestimated you. The world often looks for strength in the wrong places. It looks for noise, display, dominance, and visibility. But your strength was forged in endurance, humility, and introspection. This is why it grew so deeply. This is why it lasted. This is why, when the time came, your rise looked effortless. They didn't see the storms you survived. They only saw the calm you carried afterward. They didn't see the weight you lifted alone. They only saw the grace with which you moved. The quiet seasons they overlooked were the reasons you now stand in a place they cannot reach. Surpassing people without ever competing with them is one of life's quiet revelations. It happens slowly, almost imperceptibly, because your intention was never to outrun anyone. Your only desire was to understand yourself more deeply, to grow from the inside out, and to walk a path that aligned with your own values. Yet while you were focused on becoming, they were focused on being seen. While you were committed to depth, they were chasing appearance. And without realizing it, the difference in priorities created a distance that widened year after year until you found yourself standing in a place they never imagined you could reach. They spent their energy comparing, measuring, and trying to look superior, while your energy went into learning, healing, and understanding. They sought admiration, you sought truth. They wanted shortcuts, you wanted transformation. You walked your journey not as a race, but as an unfolding, a discovery of what your spirit was capable of becoming. So when people say you outclassed them, what they are witnessing is not a victory over others, but a victory over the parts of yourself that once doubted your worth. Every season where they chased validation pushed them further into emptiness, while every season where you chased inner clarity pushed you deeper into wisdom. It is this wisdom, not talent, not noise, not competition, that elevated you above their reach. You didn't rise by pushing others down. You rose by lifting yourself out of doubt, confusion, and pain. You found strength in places they never dared to explore. You confronted truths they avoided. You embraced growth they found uncomfortable. And because of that, you became someone they could never imitate. Life has a way of honoring those who walk with sincerity. It quietly removes you from environments where you don't belong and leads you toward places where your soul can expand. While they tried to label you, judge you, or underestimate you, the universe was preparing a path that required neither their approval nor their understanding. By the time they realized how far you had gone, it was too late for them to follow. Their habits kept them stagnant. Your hunger for growth kept you evolving. Competition was never your language. You didn't need to outperform them to feel valuable. You didn't need to win their attention to feel seen. Your validation came from a deeper place. The quiet knowing that you were becoming more aligned with your purpose. This kind of inner alignment creates a power that cannot be imitated by those who rely on external applause. They cannot replicate your journey because they never embraced the struggles that shaped you. They cannot mirror your growth because they avoided the suffering that matured you. They cannot match your depth because they never allowed themselves to grow roots. The most remarkable part of your rise is how unintentional it was. You were merely focused on healing what was broken inside you, clearing what was confusing, unlearning what was damaging, and strengthening what was fragile. In doing so, you walked into a version of yourself that outshone every illusion people once had of you. And while they stood still, content with surface-level victories, you kept moving into new layers of understanding, new forms of strength, new expressions of wisdom. They thought the journey was about being faster, louder, and more noticeable. You discovered that real elevation comes from being truer, deeper, and more grounded. They chased the spotlight while you chased authenticity. They worked to appear intelligent while you worked to become wise. They clung to the comfort of being praised while you embraced the discomfort of being refined. And refinement will always outlast performance. What people now interpret as you surpassing them is simply the natural outcome of a soul that refuses to stop growing. It is the result of choosing self-awareness over ego, humility over arrogance, discipline over distraction, and purpose over popularity. You walked a path they never considered because it required sacrifices they never wanted to make. And now the distance between you and them is not a gap of competition, but a gap of consciousness. You outclassed them because you evolved in ways they never chose to evolve. You grew past the need for comparison. You expanded beyond the level where their games could reach you. Your spirit outgrew the space where their priorities kept them trapped. And without ever trying to win anything, you became someone they could no longer compete with, even though competing was all they ever tried to do. Rising through character rather than comparison is one of the most profound transformations a person can undergo. It requires a shift from chasing approval to cultivating integrity, from performing for the world to shaping the private self. Character is not something you announce. It is something you demonstrate in the quiet decisions no one else sees. While others were busy positioning themselves to appear superior, you were quietly building a foundation rooted in honesty, discipline, compassion, and humility. That foundation became the very reason you rose beyond the level where comparison could touch you. Some people spend their lives polishing their image, hoping that admiration will fill the emptiness they refuse to confront. You chose a different path. You learned that applause is temporary, but character endures. You discovered that being trusted is more valuable than being admired, and being grounded is more powerful than being envied. While they tried to outshine each other through appearances, you chose to outgrow your old self through discipline and self-reflection. The growth that came from this decision carried you further than any competition ever could. Character is forged in difficult terrain. When life challenged your patience, you learned restraint. When people tested your kindness, you stayed true to yourself rather than responding with cruelty. When betrayal shook your trust, you rebuilt your heart without letting bitterness control you. These were not easy choices, but they were defining ones. Each moment of integrity strengthened you. Each act of responsibility elevated you. Each time you treated others with dignity, even when they didn't deserve it, you added another layer to the person you were becoming. And while these choices did not bring immediate recognition, they shaped a spirit that quietly surpassed those who relied on shortcuts. You outclassed them because you understood that true greatness does not come from proving you're better than someone else. It comes from proving you're better than who you used to be. You focused on growth, not competition. You focused on becoming trustworthy rather than being liked. You cared about being genuine more than being impressive. And in doing so, you entered a league that comparison could not reach, because comparison operates on surface-level things, while your growth was happening in the deep places where real transformation takes root. People who rely on comparison are often unstable. Their confidence rises and falls depending on who they stand next to. But your confidence grew from consistent effort, from surviving difficult situations, and from making decisions aligned with your values. This kind of stability cannot be shaken easily. It is not dependent on circumstances or opinions. It is rooted in who you are when no one is watching, and this is why your rise looks effortless from the outside. They cannot see the years you spent strengthening the parts of yourself that do not crumble under pressure. Character elevates a person quietly. It does not require a stage or a spotlight. It grows through integrity when others choose convenience. It grows through honesty when others choose deception. It grows through humility when others choose pride. These choices form a strength that cannot be stolen, copied, or imitated. People may mimic your style, but they cannot replicate your substance. They may borrow your words, but they cannot replicate the depth from which those words were born. Character creates a distance that cannot be closed with appearance. Those who underestimated you did so because they judged you through the lens of comparison. They looked at what you had rather than who you were. They assumed you were behind simply because you were silent. They did not understand that silence, when combined with integrity, becomes a force of elevation. It lifts you in ways the world cannot measure because it lifts you internally before it lifts you externally. While they were counting achievements, you were cultivating principles. While they sought recognition, you sought purpose. While they compared themselves to others, you compared yourself only to the person you were yesterday. These choices refined you into someone whose value does not fluctuate with trends, opinions, or circumstances, and that refinement is the very thing that placed you above the level where comparison rules. You rose through character, not competition, and that rise cannot be reversed because it is rooted in who you have become, not in how others see you. Power begins to shift the moment you stop feeling the need to explain yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Walking away from the urge to prove your worth is one of the highest forms of self-respect, because it means you have chosen growth over argument, peace over noise, and purpose over distraction. You began to outclass them the instant you understood that your energy is too valuable to waste on convincing others of who you are. Silence became your armor, and composure became your strategy. In that stillness, your elevation began. People who thrive on chaos often feel threatened when you no longer respond to it. They expect you to justify yourself, to defend your name, to react with emotion, or to fall into the traps of their insecurity. But you chose differently. You chose restraint. You chose to let your actions speak louder than your explanations. You chose to let your progress respond to every accusation, every doubt, and every attempt to belittle you. The moment you made that decision, the dynamic shifted. You stepped into a realm they could not reach because their power depended on your reaction, while your power grew in your discipline. Silence is not surrender. Silence is strategy. It is a conscious refusal to lower yourself to a level where arguments replace truth and noise replaces clarity. When you stopped engaging, they assumed you were afraid. They didn't realize you were evolving. They misread your lack of response as weakness, not understanding that self-control is the highest form of strength. By refusing to fight battles that didn't deserve your presence, you conserved your energy for the growth that truly mattered, and that conservation became your advantage. Some people want you to react because your reaction validates them. Your silence, however, exposes them. When you no longer participate in their drama, their behavior becomes visible for what it truly is. They lose the ability to hide behind your responses. They lose the power they once held over you. And while they scramble to regain the attention they once received, you continue rising with a calmness they cannot imitate. You are no longer entangled in their emotional turbulence, and that detachment frees you in ways argument never could. Choosing not to respond also reveals your maturity. It shows that you have learned to separate your identity from opinions, your value from judgment, and your peace from conflict. This separation marks the shift from insecurity to confidence, from reaction to intention. You began to understand that explaining yourself to people who do not want to understand you is a misuse of your spirit. And once you embraced that truth, you stepped into a higher dimension of self-awareness. That dimension is where true elevation happens. Your silence became the mirror that exposed their insecurities. Every time you walked away, instead of fighting back, you outgrew their expectations. Every moment you remained calm in the face of provocation, you highlighted their immaturity. Every time you prioritized your peace over their opinions, you demonstrated a level of control that unsettled them. They realized too late that the power they thought they had over you was an illusion. Without your response, their influence faded. As you continued choosing silence, something remarkable happened. You began to heal. With no energy wasted on unnecessary battles, your heart had space to recover. With no need to defend yourself, your spirit felt lighter. With no attachment to their perception, your path cleared. You stopped carrying the burden of trying to be understood by people who could not see beyond their own limitations, and that freedom allowed you to grow in directions they could not follow. When you refused to argue, you chose wisdom. When you refused to justify yourself, you chose dignity. When you refused to react, you chose evolution. These choices did not make you passive, they made you powerful. They took you out of the reach of pettiness and placed you in the domain of purpose. And from that place, your rise became inevitable. You didn't outclass them because you fought harder. You outclassed them because you no longer fought at all. Your silence became the turning point. It was the moment you stepped into your strength and left behind anything that could diminish it. And while they remained tangled in noise, you walked forward with a quiet authority that could not be challenged. Transformation that happens in hidden seasons is often the most powerful kind because it is shaped away from distraction, applause, and interference. Growth that happens in quiet places cannot be interrupted, and healing that unfolds without witnesses cannot be manipulated. While others believed you were standing still, something profound was happening beneath the surface of your life. You were being reshaped by experiences that left marks no one else could see. You were being stretched by circumstances that demanded maturity long before you were ready. You were learning lessons that only silence and solitude can teach. These hidden seasons sculpted the strength that eventually rose to the surface, surprising everyone who thought they had you figured out. People often assume that if they cannot see your progress, then you are not progressing at all. They judge by outward motion, forgetting that the deepest roots grow underground. You were not idle, you were preparing. Every quiet struggle added a layer of understanding. Every unanswered question deepened your wisdom. Every moment of uncertainty forced you to rely on something more solid than circumstances. And because your growth was happening away from their eyes, they mistook your stillness for stagnation. They had no idea that you were being transformed in ways that would one day set you apart. There were nights when the weight you carried was known only to God. Nights when exhaustion settled into your bones, when life pressed against your shoulders, when you questioned whether you would ever rise again. No one saw those nights, but they changed you. They stripped away illusions, exposed your vulnerabilities, and demanded clarity. In those private battles, you discovered a resilience you didn't know you had. You learned to breathe through anxiety, to trust through uncertainty, and to move even when you felt frozen. Those invisible victories prepared you for the elevation that others now believe happened suddenly. Hidden seasons also have a way of revealing your true priorities. When everything familiar begins to fall away, you are forced to confront what actually matters. You learned the value of peace when chaos tried to steal it. You learned the value of authenticity when pretending became too heavy. You learned the value of solitude when noise no longer filled the emptiness inside. These lessons refined your spirit and grounded your identity. While others were obsessed with being seen, you became devoted to becoming whole. That difference created a gap that only widened with time. As you grew quietly, the world around you continued moving at its usual speed, unaware that you were slowly becoming someone different. They interacted with the old version of you, not realizing the new version was already forming beneath the surface. They spoke to you based on who you once were, unaware that life had already carved new dimensions into your character. And when the moment came for your transformation to be visible, they were unprepared. They could not understand how a person they underestimated now carried a depth they could not match. They did not see the hidden seasons that shaped you. They only saw the results. The struggles no one witnessed became the very reasons you outclassed those who underestimated you. While they were distracted by appearances, you were being strengthened by challenges. While they sought applause, you sought clarity. While they pushed for recognition, you pushed for understanding. This difference in pursuit created a difference in outcome. You became someone who could withstand storms they never even acknowledged. You gained insights they never considered. You developed patience they never practiced. These qualities do not develop in public. They form in the hidden places, where life forces you to grow. Your hidden seasons were not wasted, they were sacred. They were the chapters where your spirit was rewritten. They were the places where old wounds were confronted and healed. They were the moments where you discovered both the fragility and the strength of your own heart. These private evolutions laid a foundation that could not be shaken by comparison or competition. By the time your growth became visible, it was already complete, and that is why it was so powerful. Those who once thought you were falling behind now realize you were rising in silence. Those who believed you were weak now see the endurance shaped in the shadows. Those who misjudged your stillness now face the undeniable truth that hidden seasons create the kind of strength the world cannot imitate. Choosing peace while others choose chaos is one of the most defining acts of strength a person can embody. It requires a clarity of spirit that does not come naturally to most. Many people cling to conflict because it distracts them from their own emptiness. They thrive on drama because silence forces them to confront themselves. But you learned to stop feeding the fires others tried to ignite around you. You recognized that your peace was not a luxury, it was a necessity, and in choosing it, you immediately rose above the level where their chaos could reach you. Some individuals create storms wherever they go, then blame the rain for ruining their lives. They invite conflict into every conversation, every interaction, every memory. You once tried to meet them halfway, thinking patience would soften them, thinking kindness would shift them, thinking empathy would change them. But chaos is a language some people refuse to stop speaking. When you finally understood this, you made a decision that changed everything. You walked away from the battles that did not belong to you. Every time you refused to participate in their arguments, you outgrew them. Every moment you chose calm over confrontation, you stepped into a higher realm of emotional discipline. Every instance where you stayed steady while they tried to provoke you highlighted the difference between someone who is controlled by their impulses and someone who is guided by their integrity. This difference is what separated you from them long before the world noticed. Peace is not passive, it is powerful. It takes courage to remain composed when provoked. It takes strength to breathe deeply when someone tries to pull you into their storm. It takes wisdom to know that silence is often the loudest answer. While they shouted, you reflected. While they accused, you observed. While they attacked, you understood. This shift in perspective allowed you to see their chaos not as a threat, but as a reflection of their own inner battles. And that understanding freed you from the obligation to fight back. Your refusal to engage frustrated them. They expected you to react, to defend, to fall apart, or to retaliate. They counted on your emotional response to validate their behavior, yet you offered none. Your peace disrupted their expectations in a way your anger never could. They mistook your calmness for weakness, unaware that it was the strongest expression of your self-control. It was the moment you stopped being affected by their noise that they realized they could no longer manipulate your emotions. Chaos is a cycle, and they remain trapped in it. You broke the cycle the moment you chose to rise above it. You learned to listen without absorbing negativity. You learned to detach without becoming bitter. You learned to respond with clarity rather than react out of impulse. These abilities are the marks of someone who is evolving, someone whose spirit has matured, someone who has gained wisdom through experience. not someone who is simply trying to win an argument. It is often said that the one who stays calm has the real power. That truth revealed itself in your life. While they exhausted themselves trying to pull you into conflict, you conserved your energy for your growth. You invested your time into becoming better, while they invested theirs into becoming louder. You healed, while they repeated the same cycles that kept them small. You found meaning in stillness, while they drowned in the very noise they created. This contrast became the silent proof of why you eventually outclassed them. Choosing peace does not mean you avoided responsibility. It means you refused to carry burdens that were never yours. You recognized that protecting your mental and emotional well-being was more important than proving a point. You realized that inner stability is far more valuable than outward victory. And with every peaceful choice you made, your life moved in a different direction, toward clarity, purpose, and emotional sovereignty. Your peace became the barrier they could not cross. It became the shield that protected your heart from unnecessary pain. It became the filter through which you learned to recognize who deserved access to your spirit. And in holding on to your peace, you demonstrated a strength that chaos could never imitate. While they remained entangled in their turmoil, you kept rising. Every calm step forward widened the gap between who they were and who you were becoming. That quiet elevation is why you eventually surpassed them, not by force, but by choosing a path they were never willing to walk. Elevation that begins within the mind and spirit before it ever becomes visible to the world is the kind that lasts the longest. True transformation does not announce itself with sudden flashes of brilliance. It grows quietly, almost imperceptibly, layer by layer, thought by thought, choice by choice. Long before anyone else recognized your rise, it was already happening inside you. You were shifting the way you thought about yourself. You were reshaping the way you understood your worth. You were healing wounds that once dictated your behavior. This inner transformation created a foundation far stronger than anything built on appearance or performance. By the time the world noticed your rise, it had already been unfolding for months, even years, in the unseen parts of your soul. People often assume growth is something that shows on the outside first. They expect visible progress, clear milestones, public victories. But real elevation begins quietly, deep in the interior world, where no one else has access. You grew in the way you carried yourself, in the way you processed pain, in the way you chose patience over impulsiveness. You elevated in the way you responded to disappointment, in the way you protected your peace, in the way you refused to let the wounds of others define your identity. These inner shifts were the true signs of your rising, though no one could see them yet. You began to notice that the things that once triggered you no longer held the same power. The voices that once shook your confidence became quiet in your mind. The opinions that once carried weight became lighter, almost irrelevant. You started to trust yourself in ways you never had before. You started to believe that your future held more than your past ever offered. I hope that these summaries help, that support you in helping yourself and find the power that you offer. This internal awakening created a calmness that others misinterpreted as indifference, not realizing it was the maturity born from inner understanding. Your rise was not fueled by a desire to impress anyone. It was fueled by a realization that you could no longer live below your potential. You recognized the patterns that kept you small and broke them one by one. You let go of beliefs that once chained your spirit. You forgave yourself for mistakes that haunted you for years. As you shed these layers, your inner world became brighter, clearer, stronger, and though no one else could witness this transformation directly, it became the catalyst for everything that later manifested in your external life. People only began to notice your elevation once it reached the surface, once your confidence became undeniable, once your decisions reflected your clarity, once your energy shifted so strongly that it could no longer be ignored, but they were seeing only the final expression of a journey that had been unfolding quietly inside you for a long time. They saw the fruit, but not the roots. They saw the breakthrough, but not the struggle. They saw the glow, but not the nights you spent questioning yourself and rebuilding your spirit piece by piece. What confused them most was how natural your rise appeared. They did not understand that the ease they saw was the result of years of inner work that no one applauded. While they sought shortcuts, you sought understanding. While they looked outward for answers, you looked inward. While they tried to perfect their image, you worked on perfecting your character. This difference meant that when your rise finally became visible, it carried a depth and stability they could not imitate. Your inner world transformed first, and because of that, everything else began to shift naturally. Your conversations changed, your standards changed, your boundaries changed, the people you allowed into your life changed, the dreams you once feared began to feel possible, and the version of yourself you were becoming felt more true, more grounded, more aligned than anything you had ever been before. Elevation that begins within cannot be taken from you, because it is not built on approval, recognition, or comparison. It is built on wisdom, resilience, clarity, and self-trust. That is why your rise looks different from theirs. That is why it lasts longer. That is why it carries a quiet authority that they cannot understand. They only saw your growth once it reached the surface. You felt it long before they ever recognized it. Rising above others is often misunderstood. People assume you climbed over them, outperformed them, or fought harder for recognition. But the truth is far more revealing. Your rise did not come from a desire to shine brighter than anyone else. You simply stepped into your own light, and in doing so, their own lack of substance, discipline, and sincerity became visible. You didn't outshine them. They dimmed themselves through choices that weakened their character, intentions that polluted their path, and habits that sabotaged their own potential. Many individuals believe they can maintain brightness through appearance alone. They mistake charisma for character, attention for respect, and noise for influence. They spend their time crafting an image rather than cultivating a soul. They want admiration without doing the inner work, and when life tests them, their light flickers because it was never rooted in anything real. Meanwhile, you were working quietly on the foundations they ignored: your integrity, your patience, your self-awareness. These invisible practices became the reason your glow eventually outlasted theirs. Your rise became noticeable only after their illusions began to collapse. They expected to stay ahead simply because they were loud, confident, or surrounded by people who applauded their surface-level qualities. But ego is a fragile foundation. It cracks under pressure. It fades when the performance ends. It collapses when confronted with truth. They dimmed themselves each time they chose pride over growth, deception over honesty, and shortcuts over discipline. They did not lose to you, they lost to their own refusal to evolve. You outclassed them not by trying to be more than they were, but by refusing to be less than you could be. You chose honesty when they chose impression. You chose self-refinement when they chose self-importance. You chose growth even when it was uncomfortable, while they chose comfort even when it was destructive. Over time, those decisions created a divide they could no longer bridge. Their light dimmed because it depended on external validation, whereas yours grew because it was fueled by inner transformation. But I will consider there is a quiet kind of justice in watching truth reveal itself. Those who once boasted about being ahead eventually faced the results of their own neglect. They didn't fall behind because of your success. They fell behind because they never built anything real within themselves. They spent so much energy trying to appear superior that they forgot to become someone strong, grounded, and resilient. When life required depth, they had none. When challenges required character, theirs crumbled. And in contrast, your endurance, shaped by private battles and personal growth, became undeniable. It is a humbling experience for them to realize that someone they once underestimated now stands in a place they cannot reach. They might blame luck or timing, but deep down they know the truth. They dimmed themselves the moment they stopped growing. They dimmed themselves when they chose comparison instead of self-awareness. They dimmed themselves when they relied on ego instead of humility. And because their identity was constructed on fragile foundations, your authentic rise exposed their instability. Your journey was never about surpassing them, it was about becoming whole. That wholeness naturally created a brightness they couldn't match because theirs was artificial from the start. Your light came from surviving storms, from healing wounds, from learning lessons, from becoming accountable for your own life. Their light came from being seen, praised, or admired. One was built internally, the other external. When pressure came, only one survived. The most powerful truth is this: your rise did not cause their decline. Their lack of discipline, lack of authenticity, and lack of humility caused their own descent. You simply continued walking upward while they stood still, convinced their temporary shine would be enough to carry them forever. But time has a way of revealing what is real. And when your inner strength became visible, their outer performance lost its effect. You did not dim their light. You did not compete with it. You simply allowed your own light to grow, and the contrast became impossible to ignore. What people now see is not you overshadowing them. It is them standing in the shadow of their own choices. You rose because you evolved. They fell behind because they refused to. Your path illuminated itself with truth. Theirs dimmed under the weight of illusion. In the end, your rise was not the result of competition, but transformation. You did not become greater by proving anyone wrong. You became greater by becoming honest with yourself. And as truth reshaped you, as wisdom softened you, as experience deepened you, you stepped naturally into a place where comparison no longer mattered. Those who once underestimated you now see what they could not see before. That elevation built in silence, integrity, and patience is elevation that cannot be undone. Your growth did not need witnesses. Your strength did not need validation. Your maturity did not need applause. Everything you became was forged in hidden rooms of the soul, and that is why it holds a radiance they cannot imitate. You outclassed them, not through effort, but through evolution. Not by rising against them, but by rising above yourself. And now the distance between you and who you used to be is far greater than the distance between you and anyone who doubted you. The story was never about them. It was always about you becoming someone too grounded to be shaken, too aware to be deceived, and too whole to be diminished by smallness. They tried to measure you with the wrong tools, but your life was never meant to fit their expectations. You were meant to grow quietly until the day your presence spoke what your words never needed to say. You outclassed them because you chose truth when illusions tempted you. You chose peace when chaos invited you. You chose growth when comfort begged you to stay. And now, without trying, without forcing, without fighting, you stand in the fullness of who you have become, a person shaped not by comparison, but by becoming.